Hey everyone, welcome to You'll Probably Agree. And I hope you guys are feeling holy today because we are talking about Conclave. And with me from the Establishing Shot is Jeff York. And from New York City filmmaker, I think that's your YouTube channel. I don't have it on me. New York City filmmaker Sujiwa. We have Sujiwa Ekanayake. So, guys, thanks for coming on and let's jump in. Wait, what the heck? Hang on a minute. Oh, okay, never mind. That's Twitter just being, or I'm sorry, X.
hmm
But yeah, just giving me problems. But all right, so who would like to break down the plot of Conclave? Let's go with Jeff.
Sure, no problem at all. I hope I pronounce all these names properly, but at the beginning of this movie, Conclave, the Pope in Rome has died, and therefore they have to have the College of Cardinals gather under the leadership of its dean, Thomas Lawrence, played by Ray Fiennes, to basically elect a new Pope. And so all these popes from all over the world come in, and there are basically four cardinals who sort of seem to take the pole positions, if you will, or pope positions, if you will, as the likely candidates. There is Aldo Bellini from the United States, and he is played by Stanley Tucci, and he's sort of a progressive. So he's sort of the liberal wing of the church, if there is such a thing. I'm not sure there is. It's probably a moderate wing, but for the sake of the narrative, he's kind of on the liberal side. Then there is Joshua Adeyemi of Nigeria. He is a conservative socially. Joseph Tremblay of Canada, a moderate. And Goffredo Tedesco of Italy, a very staunch traditionalist. And I forgot to mention that those people were played by Lithgow plays Tremblay, Lucian Massamati plays Adeyemi, and I believe it is Sergio Castellito, an Italian actor, famed much more in that country than known here, plays Tedesco, the very traditional kind of old school cardinal. They gather, and all kinds of politics and shenanigans and secrets start to come out of the conclave, aided by a little bit of gossip from one of the head nuns there, played by sort of following her mother's footsteps in the bells of St. Mary. Isabella Rossellini plays Sister Agnes. And so it's kind of a intellectual thriller, but certainly a little bit of a pulpy, almost potboiler in the sense of, it's scandalous. It's, kind of conniving evil people, even though they're men of the cloth and women of the cloth. And it makes for a pretty smart movie, almost the kind of intellectual fare they had back in the 70s quite a bit, where, it was intellectual, it was kind of confident and calm in its servitude and well acted across the board. But, having something to say about the world we live in, as well as the way man is obviously always a sinner, even if they're wearing red robes.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So what did you guys think of the film? We'll start with Sujiwa, then Jeff, and then I'll give my 2 cents.
Okay, I thought it was very good. I thought it was well made, sort of like a political thriller. It's a process movie. We watch a certain process, like a trial, or financing something, or making something play out from start to end, or a key point to the end. I thought this filmmaking was really good. The script was okay. There was some, they threw in every 5-10 minutes some kind of a interesting twist, dramatic, somewhat lightly shocking thing to keep things interesting, which is fine. So it's more entertainment than art, and as entertainment, as a drama, works really well. It has sort of the spiritual quiet that exists in temples or churches, in quiet areas, obviously, not in Kabul, for example. Um, and towards the end, it has a shocking twist, which I guess at some point we'll talk about. But the movie came out fairly recently, so we may not want to talk about the twist ending. It came out on Amazon in April, And also, I should do the HBO Rome, the news crier thing. Keep jokes about Catholics and their one God to an absolute minimum. And what else? What else did he say? Oh, no actors, no prostitutes.
Mm.
That's. Have you guys seen HBO's Rome?
Yes.
God.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The guy
Yes.
who's announcing. Right.
Yes.
I've
Yeah,
never
like,
seen Rome, but I remember they advertised the hell out of that show when it was coming out.
Yeah, it's
So
a
to
good
speak.
show. It has a great character who's like the town news crier.
Right.
And whenever foreign kings are in town, they're like keep the jokes about those religions with the one God to a minimum. So,
Right.
I thought that was hilarious.
Huh.
So yeah, overall a very good movie, and it's doing well financially. $20 million budget, they say, and 124 million in sales, they say. So if those numbers are correct, we have an interesting, profitable movie.
Yeah. Jeff, what do you think of the movie?
And the numbers have even gone up now with the election of the new pope. So there's all this interest
Yeah.
in it. And while the conclave is going on, it was the number one rental for Amazon and for another places that have it available as well. So, kind of a continuing interest. I gave away a little bit of what I thought of it. It sort of reminded me of those kind of 70s sort of smart movies that were very well done. I think Sajue makes a great point. This is very pulpy, but it's so funny because the deft hands of the people who made this film, and primarily I want to hand sort of that to, the director who did a very excellent job of keeping it subtle and contained, and that's Edward Berger. He won an Oscar a couple years back for the remake of All Quiet on the Western Front. And Peter Strawn, who's won a number of screenplay Oscars for this, adapted the novel that was itself somewhat pulpy in 2016 by Robert Harris. But I think they realized, because there is already this controversy and just even treading into this territory, that they couldn't make it too villainous, too evil, too sort of dark and mysterious. I mean, I think the darkest it kind of gets in a way is in the score, which actually is very effective because it gives a little bit of scariness to these quiet corners and these people whispering amongst themselves. You don't know quite what's going on, so there's this heaviness and a sense of mystery about it. But what I liked about it when I first saw it was that it obviously had some ideas, not only about the frailty of man and sins and what is forgiven and what isn't forgiven, especially in situations like that. Obviously, the halo of the problems the Catholic Church has had for decades now is here in this film as well. But also there's this, I dare say, almost earnestness to this film, which is kind of refreshing. It's oftentimes when any kind of religion is portrayed on screen, whether it's the big or small one, that it's ridiculed, it's to be made fun of, and they're always hypocrites, and they're always awful people who are supposed to be men on the cloth, and we gnash our teeth at how bad they are. But that's not the case here. There's some foibles and some problems, and yes, there's one or two cardinals who are, go far afield in their ambition and maybe are a little bit nasty about it. But Ray Fiennes, as the cardinal who's at the center of this, managing the conclave, is kept on an even keel, and he never raises his voice, and he's always sort of calm, and he's a very admirable figure. And I think ultimately most of the cardinals in the conclave, the way it's presented, ends up being respectful and sort of delightfully so, versus what so often comes out of Hollywood's version of any religion, particularly one that would have a lot of easy, low-hanging fruit like this religion.
Yeah.
This is not really a Hollywood movie, I think. I think this is more of an indie art house type movie.
Yeah, I mean, it was made in England, and it has an English sensibility to it. But, at the same time, I mean, it's, when I say Hollywood, I mean, in some respects, commercial fare, that this is definitely aimed at that. With the stars and the way the poster is done and different things like that. But you're right. I mean, I'm not trying to say that it's, the bastards who are, we ridiculed all too readily in Tinseltown, but it has a commercial feel to it, even though I think it's a very smart commercial entity.
Yeah.
And Scorsese made Silence. There have been Hollywood or large budget movies that don't ridicule or try to insult religion, but it's a mix.
Right. And some
Well,
do a job of balancing it. I think The
Mhm.
Mission was one of those that, the bad guy was the head cardinal. Roy Daltrous played in it, but the people who were running the mission, they had their hearts in the right place, even though they failed ultimately in that film because of the politics of the Vatican. So, but you're right. Yeah, this one is, I think, has a little bit more of that earnestness to it, which is refreshing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's movies about Buddhism and Islam and obviously other types of Christianity and
Sure.
Hinduism and Israel. Any movies that are made in Israel tackles conflicts and philosophical issues with Judaism. So I think there is a whole. I mean, this might be a separate topic. There is a whole bunch of movies that don't take the easiest way out regarding religion.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Oh,
enjoyed the film. I've seen it inadvertently 3 times because I once saw it for myself, and then I had a bunch of friends who wanted to see it. So I was
were you
like, okay.
kidnapped and forced to watch it?
uh, not really, but it's a film that I didn't mind seeing that many times because there are so many layers to it. There's so many parts where I'm like, oh, I forgot that this cardinal was doing this, or I forgot that this cardinal was doing that. And like Jeff was saying, this is sort of like the old Hollywood sort of 1970s thriller where it's very dialogue driven, it's more subtle, and it doesn't give into like sensationalistic violence. Like the furthest this movie gets to that is when there's a car bomb that goes outside, that like detonates outside of the Sistine Chapel, which I thought was like they didn't need that. That was just a little too much. Ray Fiennes is incredible in it. As Jeff and I, we were at a screening yesterday, and we were both talking about how Ray Fiennes just has this face where you can immediately tell what he's thinking and what he's feeling. There's a great scene where, and I kept his name saved on my phone because I kept forgetting it, where he's talking to Cardinal Benitez, and Benitez is saying, "I'm voting for you." And the only time that Cardinal Lawrence raises his voice is when he's telling Benitez, "I don't want your vote,"
Right.
because the people who should be in power are the ones who don't want the power. They're the responsible ones, the sympathetic ones, and Ray Fiennes kind of defined that. And luckily, here I'll just pull up spoilers because it's just going to happen. He doesn't become pope, but the right person does, and it kind of gives you a hopeful feeling in the end, where it's not bastardizing the Catholic Church, nor is it glorifying it. It sees it within a complicated light. They don't bring up pedophilia or anything like that, but there's a lot of backstabbing that happens in the film, and a lot of people who just want that job so they can have the power. One scene that really kind of comes to mind is when Stanley Tucci is talking and he says, "I do believe that women should be an inclusive voice within the Catholic Church." And someone says to him, "Maybe you shouldn't say that." And he says, "Well, why not? Because we should be progressive. We should be moving on compared to our old values." And it kind of shows the tremendous amount of sympathy that these guys carry, but also you get guys like Tedesco, who's a complete prick. And
I like Tedesco as a character.
as a character, he's great. And here I got a little clip of him, and this is, I think, why Tedesco is a great character to hate.
And he,
Quindi il prossimo Papa dovrebbe essere un italiano.
E perché no? Sono 40 anni che non abbiamo Papa italiano. 40 anni, Tommaso. Tu riesci a immaginare veramente un'alternativa?
The food of the God. Yes.
You know, absolutely the food of the
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
That's
Right? I clicked it like while you were talking, and I didn't
I
mean to
just
do
said
that.
he brings up one important point, which we can discuss later: how religions and politics should respond to extremist religious people and extremist secular people.
Yeah, and Tedesco is sort of like the conservative extremist, as you saw in that clip there. He says, "Well, we should get an Italian pope because we'll get the black guy, and you don't want that." And I would love one day if we did get a black pope, but I'm so happy that we have an American pope who's
Yes.
from Chicago, who's a White Sox fan. So now we know as a fact the White Sox are the good guys and not the Cubs. You know,
And when I said yes, I mean that's part of the introduction that you guys are from Chicago and the new pope is from Chicago. That was
Yeah.
a twist thing. I think that did that happen after we set up the show. I think we set up the show afterwards. That was one of the factors.
Yeah.
And he has some African relatives a long time ago. He was Creole relatives from Louisiana maybe 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that goes through like a long line of bloodlines. But I mean, the weirdest thing that we're gonna have with this new pope, and I mean weird in a good way, is that now like journalists can really talk to the pope and have like real conversations with them, because there's always a language barrier where they spoke English, but it was like a little bit of it where
Right.
mostly if you're talking to the pope, they're just being polite and they're smiling and they're saying yes. Here you can talk to the pope and you'll be like, can you believe that Sox game? And he'll talk about it with you. So it's amazing that we're doing that. Jeff was telling me yesterday, because I was like, it's amazing that they're electing an American pope after we just elected Trump. And maybe you could get into more details about it, Jeff. Is that
I said it might have been a slightly political move because when Poland was having its troubles with Russia and Poland needed to sort of be shored up a little bit by what they were doing, that was the time of Lech Walesa. That's when Pope John Paul II was elected. So there was a commentary almost on like stay in there and keep strong and fight the fight and maybe have a voice to sort of opposition, stand against the invading or the overreaching Soviets as they were at that time. And now here with Trump, obviously the cardinal, who's now the Pope, has already been coming out and saying things that are very much against what Trump's agenda is, and particularly in the disappearing of people and the sending of people without due process and things. So they may have very well picked him with the idea that right now America needs some divine intervention, just like it did back then.
A counterbalance to the government.
evil, if you will, maybe, yes. It's interesting too, because I think there could have been so many ways to make this bigger and broader. I mean, even with the casting of John Lithgow, I've seen John Lithgow do very brilliant, subtle work, but he can also be very funny and, a little bit broad, even as villains. I mean, in some of the Brian De Palma films, he's been a villain, and he's played it, with that sinister gaze and, sometimes the voice and different things, even if you've ever seen Obsession or some of those kind of movies early in his career. And here he's very reined in. He doesn't do anything that's too demonstrably villainous, even though he's also, along with Taladesco, one of the sort of bad guys, Tremblay. But the one thing I will say too that is interesting about the film that is keeps you, I think, engaged with it is, and it goes back to an earlier point that Sejue made, is that there are so many twists in here, and it is almost every 10 minutes there's something that comes up that sort of becomes a little bit like, oh, okay, so I guess I can watch and set it by this. But Berger, as the director, sort of weaves them in very subtly. It doesn't feel like there's that sort of bum, 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 kind of moments and stuff like that. And even, you're waiting for Rossellini to come through. And when she finally does have more than a couple of lines, she basically just says, we are, not supposed to be seen, but, we too have eyes and ears. And here is the person who did this, and that's all she says, and she sinks Tremblay's chances there. But there was no big 5-minute speech that she gives there. It was 4 or 5 sentences versus the 2 lines she had before. So I think in places like that, this film shows a lot of restraint, and I think is very admirable, because it could have easily gone the other way, even to the earlier point about the ending, which I don't know when we want to get into that, but that could have been really done broadly, or hand wringing and fretting and dramatic running up and down the hallways with pounding score, and they didn't. It was kind of soft, even though it's a big last rug pull that was kind of a big surprise to everybody, because they thought the film was over, but it wasn't. So I give Berger credit for that. He did a very deft job of keeping this subtle and smart and earnest throughout most of it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I didn't really have anything to say. Go ahead. So go ahead.
To what Jeff was saying, the style of dialogue and the script writing is minimalist here in this movie.
That's right.
And same with the cinematography and editing. They try to do the least possible to construct the movie and keep things moving, and that is good. Connected with the plot moments every 5-10 minutes that propel the story forward. So it's a minimalist movie, but it's a fast movie, and a lot happens, and a lot you're supposed to imagine because we just get the end of conversations. And I think they may have filmed more than what was put in the movie, because quite often you see the Cardinal Lawrence, I think, character, Ray Fiennes' character. We cut into him in the middle of a sentence, or we cut away from him while he's getting angry about or something, and it's not explained what are we referring to, right? So there's a lot of mysteries left in there, and yeah, they did do a really great job of weaving in details that pay off a lot later, especially about the shocking reveal at the end.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's this claustrophobic feeling. I don't know if you guys got the same feeling, but there's like this claustrophobic feeling in the film where everyone's in these little hotel rooms, or they're like in the cafe, which you would think in the Vatican would be like this big, beautiful place that would look like Hogwarts or something like that. And instead, no, it's just like this kind of like rundown looking place.
Looks like a school cafeteria.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was trying to kind of give you the feeling that these guys are trapped until they vote for the right guy. And as they're kind of stuck in this setting together, like a lot of their inner demons come out and a lot of their qualities come out. But it's kind of like a bottle film where it takes place in one location in a way. And I really kind of respected that. And I think the cinematography helps with that feeling, because like everything is kind of like underlit, but not like too dark where it's like the Batman where you can't see shit. Like it's lit in a way where these guys are sort of digging deep into their own souls and bringing it out on
low-key lighting, dramatic lighting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing too, in fact, Sajiwa would probably be more apt to talk about this, but we don't usually think of movies like this in our top tier of edited films, and yet it was acknowledged for that by at least being nominated in almost every kind of awards that there were, and I think it was a finalist even in our awards, Mike. But it's interesting to me because I think so much of the success of this film comes down to that editing as well. When we cut into a scene, to Sajiwa's point about, we're missing pieces of conversation, it's making us think a little bit along with these people to fill in those blanks. I also think it's fascinating because so much of the action is just back and forth between two people in a scene talking. But of course, any editor knows, and Sajiwa knows it better than you and me, having made so many films, that when do you cut to the person talking and when do you cut to the person listening to them? That can make the difference in a film. I mean, if you've ever watched the movie Ordinary People, I always think that one of the great things about that film is, even though it doesn't have the editing of other films that, were more dramatic of that time period, it's so key on, Raging Bull that year, as a matter of fact, or Elephant Man, where the editing is really driving the scares and or the action to both those films. But in Ordinary People, it's like, how much are we seeing a character say versus the person he's talking to hearing it? And I think that also puts us intimately into the scene. Like we're almost, like, where do our eyes look when we're watching two people talk to us in a room? And I think that kind of subtle editing is very much on display here and adds to it. Because again, not only do we not know all the conversations that are going on, but sometimes the characters are a little bit hard to read, or we don't know exactly what they're presenting. When Cardinal Thomas, Doubting Thomas, as it were, confronts Tremblay about bringing the nun to the conclave to embarrass the Nigerian cardinal, John Lithgow plays it very straight. And he says, I didn't do this. I didn't do this. You have to be careful here, Thomas. Yeah. And it's as earnest and as calm and as collected and, as Lithgow gets on screen. And yet he's lying at that point. So, even though we're close, Lithgow and the editor aren't betraying his line. They're letting us see him doing a really good job of lying. There's nothing flickering in his eyes. There's not a little hanging on him a little too long where he looks down kind of guiltily. So things like that, I think, as you watch this film repeatedly, if you do, I mean, I watched it for the third time for
Yeah.
this show. I noticed a lot of that and thought, wow, this is kind of a marvel of editing.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that it's very reliant on people's reactions, like you were saying, Jeff. Like they're always like kind of focusing in on Ray Fiennes' face because he's got to take all this information in, all
Right.
this backstabbing, all this craziness, and he has to keep his composure. And finally, there is a scene where he's like alone in the bedroom and he just breaks down crying
Mhm.
because I think if I were in his position, I'd be crying every day. But he has this enormous weight on his shoulders and he does it with such grace. And yeah, John Lithgow, I really like in this movie because John Lithgow has this really likable persona. Like I'll always remember him from Third Rock from the Sun. That's what I grew up with. And I know he played like a lot of bad guy, like Cliffhanger. He's like a bad guy in it. And there's like
Well,
a
he was
movie-
did you ever see the Showtime series Dexter in the 4th season where he's the serial
Uh,
killer? Oh my goodness.
no, although I
Yeah.
have seen 6 Feet Under where Michael C. Hall is that
Yeah,
her?
Michael
Yeah.
C. Hall, that's right.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that movie where Michael C. Hall. Well, I would just say 6 Feet Under. Everyone's just really horny in that show, and like the whole show is just people like banging each other, and Michael C. Hall like cheats on his boyfriend so much in that show, and yet his boyfriend still keeps him in and keeps him part of the unit. So I've never seen him in Dexter because I don't know. I just like serial killers always just kind of bored me, like in a way, because I'm like, well, murder happens every day. Like it's not a natural thing.
Well, this
But
serial killer is trying to be a real person, like trying to
yeah,
correct his ways, and he only takes out bad people. That's the shtick.
yeah,
That
yeah.
his dad is a cop, so he taught him to take out bad people that sort of slip through the cracks of justice. But
Yeah.
but Lithgow, yeah, he plays it very well. To your point, Mike, and that's where I think they even have you guessing a little bit as far as some of the characters' sort of movements or meanings and stuff like that. Can I ask you guys a question? Because this was occurred to me as I was watching it, and actually, Sajua, you mentioned it in one of your back and forths while we were getting ready for this. The Adeyemi, the cardinal from Nigeria, he gets unfortunately eliminated because he's caught up in a sex scandal that happened 30 years ago when he succumbed to the delights of sex with a young woman, and it was a long time ago. He says he was very young then, even though Cardinal Francis reminds him that the girl was 19, she was young, he was 30, and he was already a priest. But I wanted to just talk about that because I think that's a little bit of the stand-in for the Catholic sex scandals with priests and altar boys, et cetera, as well as the fact that it's the a little bit maybe, and I don't want to necessarily tread on this because it didn't occur to me until I watched it now this third time, but it's the black man, of course, who's that person who sort of had the sexual proclivity, which is not the Catholic cliche, but it's a little bit of an old-timey cliche that hasn't been seen. Did that strike you guys as he was maybe done a little bit wrong, or that maybe he got a little bit too hard, or that was a bit maybe too sort of
I think they kind of
in a way? I'm just curious.
Mike, you want to go?
Yeah, well, I think they just kind of piled on him because he was the black guy and it was easy to do because that's what society still does, even after we've had a black president. And it just goes to show you how the Catholic Church still isn't over their racism. And it's an unfortunate thing, but I think that's what it was reflecting on. And I mean, like I said before, I hope one day we do get a black pope so then we can, get rid of all these assumptions that especially America, mostly racist society has.
I thought it was good and interesting because a lot of Catholics are non-white. A lot of Catholics in Africa,
That's right.
throughout the Latin Americas, throughout the Middle East. I think some in the Middle East, at least. A lot in India. So,
obviously a lot in
Africa,
Spain and Hispanic countries in South America as well.
Yeah. Well, Spain would be considered European, but South American, yes.
Right, right.
Yeah. I'm saying there's a lot of non-European, non-white Catholics. So those people would be used to sex scandals um, that are not related to children, which is the issue in the
Sure.
U.S. and in Europe. But in any religious order, I can think of two, which is Buddhism and Catholicism, that has celibate monks. There's always sex scandals, right?
Yeah, right.
There's, I mean, it goes back forever in Asia, forever in Europe, and wherever Catholicism is. So I think that was an interesting choice to give that problem to a African actor, African character, as opposed to either not having any African significant characters in the
Right.
movie, and also internally, until the scandal broke, a lot of the Cardinals were supporting him.
That's right. He was a favorite up until then, really.
Yeah, and once the scandal broke, I think the College of Cardinals strategy or justification was this is going to be difficult to defend against the public, not
Yeah.
necessarily among themselves.
Right.
They
In
could
fact,
shoot him and move on, right?
that's
So-
right. In fact, even Cardinal Francis speaks of that. He says that that this will get out and we cannot defend this, especially knowing all of the sexual scandals that the church has had. And that's about as close as they come to really hitting the nail on the head about what is really the sexual problem with the church.
Yeah,
And it's funny because go ahead.
yeah, and so that whole thing becoming a big deal in Africa would end worldwide. It's going to hurt the career of that if he was elected Pope, right?
Right.
Imagine if as soon as the American Pope was elected, same kind of scandal broke out. That's what the media and people in opposition to Catholicism will just talk about. So I thought that was. I mean, you could see it as a African character, receiving an unfortunate end in the movie, but you can also see it as European filmmaking opening up to the existence of so many non-white Catholics and bringing in one of those problems in those communities and a problem for the church. So I thought it was done in an interesting way. And internally inside the movie, among the Cardinals, and especially through the voice of Cardinal Lawrence, it was handled in a complex way. It wasn't like, oh, we don't want to elect him because he's black. Tedesco's faction might have been against it, but overall they were like, yeah, this guy would make a good pope, except we can't do it because of this major problem.
Yeah, I have to admit, it wasn't until the third time I saw it that it struck me as like, I wonder if that was an issue or not. But then I think you could argue almost argue on both sides of the fence, and I think you did an excellent job, both of you, by pointing out that there's going to be the prejudice as to Tedesco and his conservative, or much more rigid traditionalists would take it. And then there's also the people who would say, well, just because he's a black character doesn't mean that he has to be presented as totally, with a spotless record to avoid any kind of other prejudices. I mean, he's a character who is a human being, and he just happens to be black in this instance, where the way Tedesco discriminates against him because he's not a traditional looking Catholic is a different kind of sin, not sin. I mean, it's Tedesco's sin, inability to see him beyond, those sort of surface things, where I think the other way is like, he's a man and he succumbed, and it could have been any person from any country of any color, and kind of bravo for them doing that without feeling any need to, sort of make it too
cleaning it up too much.
Unfettered.
Yeah, it doesn't come off as like completely politically motivated, or that it's like preaching to the
it
choir.
It doesn't come off as anti-black, basically. It's not
exactly
not a film that has an anti-black perspective being expressed through that character.
I have to say too, Mike, that, and we talked about this a little bit last night, but they always say that great acting is reacting, and
Mm-hmm.
I think Ray Fiennes, even though he didn't win awards for this, he was nominated in almost every critics group and BAFTA and Oscar, et cetera, et cetera. But it's even, I think, more of an impressive performance with repeated viewings, because
Mm-hmm.
his reaction is the key that sort of drives the plot in each of the scenes. Because to your point, Sajua, about every 10 minutes he finds out something like, okay, now I've got to go talk to the cardinal from Nigeria. Now I've got to go talk to Bellini again. Now
Mhm.
Bellini's mad at me. I gotta
It's
go.
a detective story.
Yeah, he's a
it's like-
detective, and
Yeah.
he's reacting to all these people, and yet he's also, putting together in his mind the way a detective would, sort of evidence on where the best candidate may lie, with the people sort of eliminating themselves or scandals eliminating them. But I also love that he is feeling it each time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he is not happy to have to tell the Nigerian cardinal that it's maybe the most devastating line in the movie, when he goes
"You'll
like,
never be Pope."
"You'll
Yeah.
never be Pope," and it's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
or he's having to play this sort of weird cat and mouse game with the Sister Agnes, and she's a pistol,
Oh, yeah.
and even his buddy, the very progressive Bellini, is a little bit of a pissant during some of it, and accusing him of being, letting his ego run amok, and yet, also showing that he wasn't strong enough to stand up and speak his beliefs when it became maybe controversial to do so. But I love the fact that every scene is not only moving the plot along, but they're moving this Cardinal Francis along, and what his reactions to it, how he's feeling as a man of the church, and the person charged with coming up with a suitable candidate.
Yeah. What do you guys?
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead. You're
Okay,
good.
so
Go ahead.
one filmmaking thing that should be mentioned, the cinematography and editing, they use the God's eye perspective quite often in this movie, as a way to, unlike in other movies, the characters take the concept of God seriously.
Yes.
So by using those shots, you are putting additional pressure on the characters and also on the structure of the movie, that what these characters are doing, according to their own belief, are being watched by a higher power, which we see reflected in the God's eye view perspective. The name for that shot is the God's eye perspective. It's someone on the ceiling or in the sky looking down, right? So that's used throughout the movie, almost as an editing device, as a screenwriting device to increase the pressure on these characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was really good.
Yeah, and the movie, I kind of like how it depicted the Vatican's functionality, because they could have depicted it as this place that's completely disorganized and everyone's at each other's throats, or they could have depicted it as a place where everything's great and rosy and everyone gets along, but it's very complicated. It's about everyone who they want this, like, a lot of people want this position of power, and some are good, some are bad. There's a lot of, like, one of the most surprising moments to me is that it wasn't Tedesco but Tremblay who released the records regarding Father ADME, and it just shows that nobody is quite who they seem. And then there's that reveal that the Pope himself, before he died, was spying on everyone. He didn't trust anyone. So that movie has a big sort of statement on the trust that these priests, who should just trust each other, don't. They're just constantly at each other. So it's a dysfunctionality. But at the end of the film, without saying who gets the job, it shows that the person who was the most qualified for the job actually got it in the end, and everyone put their differences aside, which that was probably after the guy who they chose kind of told everyone off and said, "You're at each other's throats, but really we should be serving every man, woman, and child of God, not just each other." And I kind of like how it had that complexity to it.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead, Sajuma.
Okay, so
Well, I'm just going to say, okay.
There you go.
Well, I'm going to make your point for you, maybe. So forgive me if I do. I don't want to necessarily step on your feet, but I know you were thinking something that you alluded to earlier. And I think what is fascinating is about the if you will, the climax, the sort of end that determines who becomes the Pope, is not only driven by the actions of the bomb that goes off and the falling debris in the church where they're voting, but also Tedesco wants a war with the Muslims for this, and he, it's hardly the point of view of a man of God in the sense of like, let's go out and again, I think that's the worst sin, much more so than the last 200 years of known buggery or whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's going on for more centuries, I'm sure, but still, just as long as that, we've had religious wars and more blood has been spilt in the name of a deity, no matter whose deity it is, than any other kind of war. And here's Tedesco wanting that kind of thing again. And the one priest the cardinal who ends up talking and says, "What do you know of war?" I was in all these different Congos, the Congo,
he was in Afghanistan,
and the places I've seen, what it does to people and what war is. And, these people from really, it's almost that sort of senators sending boys to die for them in the 1960s in Vietnam kind of mentality that he's fighting against. And I love the fact that it's brought on. And to me, that's the point that I think is the ultimate of this film. And that is, yes, there's a war going on between factions and who's going to do it, as Bellini says. But when it comes down to reacting to this terrible event, and the one cardinal's reaction is to find peace and brotherhood and connection through it, and the other priest's cardinal's reaction is to annihilate the enemy and stop having any kind of conflict. I think that's where this point sort of transcends pulp and now becomes something a little more profound.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, that one thing I was going to say prior to that, and I'll get to Jeff's point also. Much of the process is grounded in reality, but the end, and we have to understand that this is a political, almost inside the throne room, inside the kingdom, inside a hall of power type situation with very ambitious people representing lots of other people, right? So in that kind of a context, even though the ending of this movie is unpredictable and entertaining and shocking, I wonder how realistic in this political process would a secret cardinal who has no visible church in Kabul, I assume they have to
right
and was accepted at the last minute
into the conclave,
followers, if any. I mean, he must have some, have to hide underground because of extremist Islam in Afghanistan. I wonder how likely such a person would be to be chosen as the new central figure of Catholicism worldwide. So
it's Hollywood. So
well, let me ask you this, Mike and Sajua. Do you think it's a little bit of a Christ metaphor? I mean, it reminds me of even in dare I say the Last Crusade, when it's like, that isn't the goblet of a carpenter. It's the basic wood one. And here is this man of the people, this man who is delivering the hope of Christ, the hope of Christianity, in a place where it's not welcome, where he is probably a pariah. And arguably, that's sort of the story of Jesus. Jesus was coming in against the religious leaders already that were out there, going against a lot of the hierarchy and patriarchy and all that kind of good stuff. Maybe that's the message there. But yeah, in this day and age of social media and CNN and everything else, I don't know if he would have been that well kept of a secret. But it makes for another, I think, comparison to maybe what we're intended to, and that is maybe he has a little bit of the true spirit of Christianity in him, literally, with a similar story of that of Christ.
Yeah, because
okay, you want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think this is not really the Christ story. This is like electing a new leader for inside the Roman, inside the Roman Empire, right? As opposed to if we go back 1,000 years, if this was taking place 1,000 years ago.
But he's the most Christ-like of the popes.
Yes, I mean I think
the
is the
Pope candidate.
almost the fantasy element
Yes.
that was unpredictable. That was put into this movie. They're not electing the most Christ-like person. They're electing who can govern this massive empire on Earth, made up of all these powerful factions.
Yeah. Well, it is a little Hollywood where, they do elect the right guy for the job. But like he came into the last minute. He isn't like as tight knit with all these other cardinals as they would be because most likely in real life they would elect someone that they know. And instead they elect this complete stranger and he wins everyone's heart over with this big speech. But would that really happen? I don't think so. But one great quote that I always liked is I was reading Life Itself by Roger Ebert, and I think it was I probably had the wrong journalist, but it was like with Walter Cronkite, and they were talking about JFK, and someone was saying, "Oh, that movie." I think Cronkite. He was saying like that movie's completely false, and I can't believe they released this. And Roger said to him, "Well, movies are about feelings more than they are about facts. And how is this movie going to make you feel?" And I think the aim of Edward Berger is that he wanted you to feel like the Catholic Church, despite all of its flaws, is functional because the Vatican is the longest running form of government that has been functional. And I think it's trying to represent that. So I don't care how inaccurate it is. I just cared about how it worked as a narrative. And as a narrative, I think it worked for me.
I think it also is trying very much so to err, and this is probably why some conservative groups did not like it, on the progressive side. It has to be something that is moving forward. It is not done well when it's clung to the old. And that's where there needs to be more of the Bellini side than the Tedesco. Am I saying it right? I've lost my train of thought here for a second.
It's okay.
The Tedesco side. Yeah, the Tedesco faction, which is just wanting to take it back to the way it used to be. And we haven't had a Roman, Pope since in 40 years, blah, blah, blah. I mean, even to the point, and it's a little bit maybe, I don't want to say on the nose, but subtly getting there, that the person who they elect Pope has the genitals of a woman as well as a man, which is sort of acknowledging that women have never had a place in this church properly. And here we are in the 21st century, and they still don't. When they elected the new Pope and everybody's out there on the balcony and waving their arms and all this, there's not a woman there. And women are still relegated to being as high as they can get is to be a nun. So I think in some respects, the subtleties or maybe not so subtle movements like that, and the voice of Sister Agnes really coming in and sort of, having a vote, if you will, almost by her testimony, is all speaking to trying to push this church continuing forward. They did that with Pope Francis. They've done that now with Pope Leo. They continue to do that. John Paul II was that in many respects. They keep moving it forward a long ways away from, some of the coddling of Nazism and fascism during World War II, et cetera, as well as looking the other way through centuries of abuse. The one thing I wanted to just also say that I think is a wonderful point about this, and I bring it up because it is the way they treated the cardinal, who of course ultimately does become the Pope, and that's Benitez. Is to Sajiwa's earlier point, he is often shot in the scene, but very much in the background, but still there and identifiable. Yeah. And it reminded me a little bit of the way they had, the henchmen in Honora always sort of framed that he's looking at Honora, he's watching her, he's studying her, he's interested in her story, and the way they use space around the characters. And to Sajiwa's point, the God shot, these characters are always dwarfed by their surroundings. Even when Adeyemi is, sort of being told he's not going to be Pope, he's kind of framed like I am right now, where there's all this space around him. He's just kind of this lone person sitting there, taking the slings and arrows about the realization he's not going to make it. And it's an interesting way of showing the loneliness of their profession as well as the bigness of everything around them. These men are sort of dwarfed by the bigness of this conclave, the bigness of trying to serve God, the bigness of this world that is often against us. And even, Benitez sort of always there. He's a little bit in the background, but he's there until he's finally in the foreground and he stands up in the theater full of dust from the explosion. And makes his speech. It's also one of only two speeches in here that we get. The first one is when Cardinal Thomas starts it off by saying, we have to have doubt, we have to have hope, we have to have questions and find our answers in faith and not be so damned assured of everything before we even get a chance to let this process take place. In other words, don't vote coming in here already knowing where you're going to go. Let's use this conclave to its full fruition. And I love that message here too. It's, sort of don't judge the book by its cover. Let's actually listen to each other and find a way through this together.
Yeah, this movie is like Moneyball in a sense.
Okay.
For any one of those financial catastrophes or, great successes or, investigations, it really, even for someone who has very little interest in religion, the detective process, and just the filmmaking keeps it interesting. Who's going to win? It's a great little contest process movie that brings in all these other factors. There's a big dark history of Catholicism. It's tied to colonialism, all the murders, inquisitions. There's so the movie is pushing for the liberal side because we already know there's a very dark conservative side or a very dark side, which was, I guess, the norm back in the day, like 500 years ago and beyond. And then another question is, I wonder if there is an actual creator of the universe 5 billion years ago or 13 billion years ago, and maybe he or she has some rule. There can be no direct contact with the creation. So I wonder if he's going through all these years. No, man, I'm not into Catholicism. I'm into Zoroastrianism. When will one of you get it?
Yeah, and Ray Fiennes' character Cardinal Lawrence, he has his doubts with religion. He's losing his faith. And by the end of the movie, it kind of makes it ominous if he's going to keep his job as a cardinal or if he's not. Is he gonna run off and just say I want to live a normal life because this whole process has discouraged me? I think he does get encouraged at the end because he does end up deciding to leave Cardinal Benitez's secret a secret, but I mean, if I were to guess years after this, I'm going to guess eventually his secret would come out. But he was a character that, like, as you were saying, it's like a detective movie. Like in a lot of detective movies, the detective's about to retire. He doesn't want the job anymore. It's like Morgan Freeman in Seven. Like the world has beaten him down and he doesn't want it anymore. Except on like Seven, this has a more optimistic outlook where Cardinal Lawrence decides, I think, to stay Pope, but to stay a Cardinal. And it's he's a very interesting character in that sense where doubt plays a big part in religion because we don't know if God exists because we can't see him. We don't know if he really rose from the, if he really was resurrected after he died on the cross. And, and that's the whole point of religion is that you're supposed to have faith by not knowing. And, are we ultimately going to know what happens with Pope Benitez in the end? No, but it at least gives us a sense of hope and makes us realize doubt is there, but I guess that's kind of the point of religion, which to me, they just have that doubt because they say it's the point of religion because there's really nothing there. But that's I'm not going to get into my religious beliefs, but I think that feeling of that feeling of doubt and hopelessness does flourish wonderfully in the end. It ties itself up into a neat little bow, because he's very relieved when he doesn't get the job at the end. And, maybe he was right that maybe Lawrence would have been a good pope. And it kind of makes me think about that. But at the same time, it's good that he stayed the way.
And he might have been in the
stayed
right
way he was.
position,
Yeah.
the right position to sort of guide it and shepherd it, if you will,
Yeah.
to where it needed to be, as opposed to necessarily taking the limelight. They may not have gotten to the conclusion without his due diligence. So I think in many respects, his call was to stay in this, keep the faith,
Yeah.
find the better path, and ensure that the papacy was preserved with a better candidate than obviously the ones that were starting out with getting more votes.
Yeah.
I think the process for the main character, Cardinal Lawrence, the miraculous ending, I think, restored his faith or pushed him towards sort of a positive perspective. And we see that towards the end, him looking at the turtle, looking at the nuns, and deciding to keep supporting the new pope. So I think he was transformed, as all characters should be by the end of the movie, in a positive way. And regarding the other item that you mentioned, Mike, about religious people using the argument that doubt is something you should have, I think that's just religions have lost many ways to sell the product. Over the development of secular life, philosophy, science, democracy, ending of monarchies, ending of colonialism. So one of the things they sell now is there is a mystery, and that is an important aspect of religion. I mean, you could argue that is a true statement about existence, because we don't know all about everything yet, and we may never know, or at least for tens of thousands of years, a lot of the mysteries. So right now they promote the mysterious aspect of life and tie it to the religions.
Yeah.
One thing, if I may, and I don't want to necessarily play my cards here about my religious beliefs, but I think one of the things that this film subtly gets at throughout, and let alone at the very end, is a sense of, to Sajiwa's point, not only the mystery, but I think the idea that there are certain things evident to us that suggest a tract of science. And I am not going to be one to pretend to think that I know God any better than the other person, or who or what that being is like, or even if it is a being. We want to give it a person's visage because that's easier for us to contemplate and various sorts. But I've always thought that if there was one explanation of God that may be slightly more logical than not, is that he's a scientist. Because there is science and math in everything. It's in art, it's in music, it's in planning, landscaping, 100 other things. There's systems. There's 9 months to make a child. There's these parts where the age starts to happen, and these things you can do to change bones and change blood and change illness, et cetera, et cetera. All science-based. And it's interesting that at the end, when we find out that the cardinal has Benitez has both male and female genitals, but we don't understand that. Why is that? Well, we can say it's because in science, when it changes either to the man or the female decision, somehow nature got it wrong here. It's like, well, maybe that's also a scientific abnormal quality that ends up being livable. It doesn't end it. It's another way, if you will, a mutation. The X-Men is oftentimes about those kinds of aspects of God and the sense of the universe. So I think they're subtly nodding to, if we try to understand God, it's a fool's errand. But if we try to give him any sort of description, it might be better than a dad. It might be to give him somebody who's, we're all a petri dish. And these are parts of the experiment of this planet. Maybe on another planet they haven't progressed past the covered wagon or the buggy and horse and carriage or whatever. But maybe they're more peaceful because they're more emotionally mature than we are. We're very intellectually mature, but not always emotionally mature. But I think that sort of nods to that science thing at the end, like, hey, that's not necessarily wrong. It's just in whatever the way science works, another version of what's the experiment in that petri dish.
Yeah. And there's that great line from Benitez where he says, I was going to get the surgery, I think it was a hysterectomy, I don't know.
Right, that's right.
And yeah, and he decided, no, I want to stay the way God made me.
That's right. That's right.
And I think that was sort of the thing that made Lawrence go, this guy is a man of God. He knows what he's talking about. It's about accepting yourself for who you are, and I guess the main thing in religion is, there are people who get surgeries to change their genitalia, whatever, and accepting them is going to be an uphill battle, but Benitez at least starts the little flurry for that battle. And on one more note, the movie doesn't end with the cardinals. It ends on a final shot with the nuns, showing how they're a minority in it. And it's shot in that kind of like outside the window, looking over bird's view way, where I think it's kind of saying things are going to start to change, and the way that we view gender dynamics will shift a little bit.
By the way, I misspoke. Benitez is born with ovum, not necessarily
ovaries
female
and,
genitals markings. It's the internal stuff that you would not find. I misspoke. I think I said genitals, but even in various places where there's sometimes sort of anomalies like that. But here it's in internal ovums. So
when I had my appendix taken out, they did not find any female parts.
You're all man, Sajui.
Oh, you're a man! I am man! All right, that's TBD. This is South Park, guys.
It removed a layer of complexity from my life. But on the other hand,
I think you're pretty complex already.
I guess you can't have children now.
On the other hand, I could have ended up being Pope, so I don't know.
But I mean,
one serious note about Tedesco's point about how to deal with extremist Muslims, and and you can extrapolate extremist other religious people, extremist secular, anarchist or whatever. So that's an issue in the world. The movie didn't go into it because it was focusing on another issue.
It's a lot of balls to juggle.
So Tedesco does have one interesting point, or relevant point, which is, his way of fighting extremist violence may be different and unacceptable to the Catholic Church at large, but in general, we do want societies where decisions are made not through use of force, but through dialogue and a political process, right? So whoever becomes the next, this might have been a thread that was in the book. I haven't read the book, or it might have been filmed, but they didn't go into it. But this is sort of a unexplored part of the movie, which is how does the new Catholic Church respond to extremist Muslim violence in Italy, right? That was not discussed. So Tedesco has a point that was not addressed by the movie.
Right. And well, that's the thing with books, is that you get a lot more layers to your character than you're gonna get with a movie, because you got to trim it to 2 hours. I mean, you can make a 3-hour film, but it still won't cover all of the book.
But the film does argue that the answer is not more violence.
Well, I mean, that's what the movie. That's what the movie.
Modern church's take on it is. Catholics, not so much. Religion, not so much.
Because the secular authority and regular life in the West, and even in developing countries, we want to shut down the extremist violence argument for power and how societies are run. So. So Tedesco had one good point, even though the way he was going about it and his ultimate ending he may have wanted to create a more militant church with an army or something, right? Who knows? Good thing he was not elected.
Yeah. And the thing about this movie is that isn't quite accurate, but I think kind of gives it a more happy ending. Is that Pope Benitez is going to be there for a long time because he looks like he's in like what his 40s, maybe 30s.
Yeah.
And the Catholic Church, when they elect a pope, they're usually like Pope Leo. They're like 69. They last for like 10 to 15 years, maybe 20. And when you have a young pope that that whatever viewpoint they have, and hopefully Pope Benitez doesn't get power hungry, but who knows, money changes people, or not money but power. Yeah, I was thinking of the White Lotus for a second, but
Well, the Catholic Church is, I think the Vatican is the richest
oh
land
yeah,
per capita in the world.
there's some great bits from George Carlin about religion that I love.
Yes.
There's one about, God loves you and he always needs money. And then the other one was, God, if you break any of the 10 commandments, God is going to take you to a place that's full of burning and torturing and suffering, and you're going to be there till the end of time. But he loves you, and that pretty much perfectly sums up Catholicism to me. But there I go. I produce, but I'm not an atheist. I'm more of like an agnostic. But I think that's just because I'm afraid of dying. But that's a whole other thing. But I think that's
Also because you live in modern United States in a major city, so
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
you can't ignore obvious truths like the dialogue, political process, and science and tech. Obviously have explained away some of the arguments the religions make. Now, on the bright side, the religions could argue, as is shown in this movie, having a set of values, having a tradition of doing things. This is a way to live and a way to organize society and a way to keep things going. Whether a God exists, whether the foundational texts are true or not, religions could argue, and I think this is why a lot of people are in religions, who are not philosophical, who are not challenging the stories. It gives them structure, gives them community, gives them resources, gives them a way to live that's approved by a significant number of people. So the religions could argue, listen, your life would be far more miserable without us.
Oh yeah, and I think I think religion. Look, it's not a good or a bad thing because life isn't like that. Life is areas of gray, or as I like to say, shades of color. I think a lot of people have religion because let's say you live somewhere that's really poor and there's not a lot of hope. You have religion to give you a sense of purpose and being and hopefulness, where if you just believe you die and then you have no conscience, maybe you go a little crazy, and maybe it keeps people from going nuts.
Well,
And
religion is very popular in the U.S., which is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So
yeah,
ultimately, humans come to the question of what is life, what will happen to me after I die, and what are some good ways to live, right? So different religions, different secular philosophies
yeah.
have come up with different answers. So religion is still popular because fear of death and needing structure is still a thing for humans, no matter how rich or poor they are.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of people use religion as a weapon because the people in this country who are the most vocal about their religion are the ones who loves everybody as long as they're white, and that's the main problem with, I mean, of course, not just the United States, but the world. But but Conclave, to wrap it up, it's a film that gives you doubt, but then gives you relief and kind of makes you think maybe things will work out and be okay. And with the election of this new pope, I was worried after Francis they were gonna pick like another Benedict who looks like Emperor Palpatine, if you ever thought about it. But luckily, they went with Leo, who, I mean, he's not perfect. He does believe that that marriage should be between a man and a woman, and that should be the institution for a family. Maybe that can change. Maybe his mind will change a little bit. Pope Francis's mind, actually, he originally thought the same thing, but then he did say later on in his life that he wants everyone to feel included in the church,
Yeah,
and
well,
that's kind of what. Yeah.
one issue with that is something like 90% of humans are straight people, right? So this
Well,
this is going to be a tough sell if you
mhm.
look at it in terms of politics, right?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
that's the
this
main
is a
thing. Yeah.
tough this is a tough sell, and you can argue that Democrats lost the most recent election because Republicans jumped on that that idea that Democrats are going to mainstream trans identity and gay marriage and all that.
Yeah.
And so that made a lot of straight people afraid. I mean, idiots, but made them afraid. Nevertheless, so the existence of a large number of heterosexual people who want kids and families is something these political institutions have to take into consideration when they're trying to mainstream or bring out these alternate lifestyles into a more acceptable, space, so that people are not persecuted for not being straight, right, or for being
Mhm.
gay or lesbian. So it's a very complex political problem on this planet.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's 90% or not because, as the years go on, more people are coming out as gay and bi and all
I mean,
that. And
worldwide,
yeah.
worldwide.
Well, okay, yeah, worldwide. And we don't even know worldwide if that's the number
Right.
because I think a lot of people are still in the closet
This is
because
local
of the
law.
repercussions that follows them. They don't want to wind up like Matthew Shepard.
I think one thing that this conversation, the movie Conclave, and some of the things that George Carlin or the great philosopher contrarian Christopher Hitchens argued is there's also a great separation between religion and man. We are interpreting God. We do not know absolutes. There are no absolutes. The sun has come up and somebody did that or something did that. I don't believe that everything in the world is meaningless, nor do I believe that it's all random. It can't be. But to that end, how that actually works, exactly how God or a deity or whatever fits in, it remains to be seen. We can guess, we can make educated discussions about it, as we've had tonight, as the movie Conclave makes as well, but we don't really know. And I think what I loved about the movie Conclave and what we're discussing here is it's up to us interpret and I think inherently we know in our gut sometimes what is good or what we should be. We all feel guilty when we're children and we hurt somebody. The first time that happens, or we cry, or we've hurt somebody and caused them pain, we know it's bad. We know how we feel when we're hurt. We don't want to do that to others. It's the golden rule. The interesting thing is, I think George Carlin was talking about the 10 Commandments and, God wants to love us, even though he seems to be this insecure person who needs all this worship and singing every Sunday. And he's always poor. But that's our interpretation of God. And maybe that's the wrong interpretation of God. If there is a deity, I doubt that he needs our praise. If there is a deity, I doubt that he needs us to say how many Hail Marys and et cetera, et cetera. He's defining us in his own way that we can't imagine. He's maybe given us some examples of it, and I think we know what those are, and those are clear to follow. But the rest is, to your point, Mike, shades of color, shades of black and white, and too often I think we play the world in absolutes, and even God himself, what he's set up for us is not painted that black and white.
Yeah.
Well, the religion, I think, is more about humans than the God, because
That's right.
if a God were to show up and say,
Yes.
I want all of you to commit suicide, us humans will be like, hold on there.
Yeah.
We
It's
have,
very true. Yeah.
we have a different take on it, even though.
Well, and like even the 10 Commandments, 7 of them are about property, because at that time period, there were not the laws and rules that people had. And everybody who was making those rules was worried about property. It doesn't talk about children. It doesn't talk about rape. It doesn't talk about abuse or violence, but it wants you to honor your mother and father. What? That's the hierarchy that they wanted you to respect and not sass back to and not question. And just like, regimes and authoritative people don't want people questioning their authority.
Yeah, the nature of the universe. Is there a creator or creators? Is this a simulation or a scientific experiment? That cannot be discussed honestly inside the religions, because the religions, like a brand or a nation, more like a brand, have limits on what they're selling, what can
Yes.
be discussed, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
religions are
Well said.
really the religions are really, how are humans going to treat each other, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we going to stone women that we don't like, or are we going to have trials for people that we accuse, nonviolent trials for people that we accuse of crimes, right? Are we going to, accept refugees? To what degree do we accept all refugees, or are criminals allowed in?
We're going to punish children who have had nothing to do with their lot in life at
Mhm.
6 and 5. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, these
But
are.
I'm sorry, Mike. We go on when you're trying to
Oh
end the
no,
show.
I don't know if you've ever seen this clip from The
Part
West
2.
Wing. Yeah.
These are human problems. A
That's
God,
exactly right.
creator of the universe,
That's
would have
right.
easy answers for these.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
right.
I mean, I always found it odd that in order for people to atone for their sins, he's going to crucify his son. Like, what a horrible thing to do. Why would you ever do that? Isn't there a more peaceful way
No,
of
the
atoning?
religions are stories.
Yeah.
They're dramatic
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a great clip from The West Wing where, oh God, why am I forgetting?
President Bartlett?
Yeah, Martin Sheen is talking to like this right wing radio host, and he starts breaking down the Bible, saying, "So should I sell my daughter into slavery? Should I do this? Should I?" And it kind of shows kind of like the more crazy elements of the Bible that we don't follow, because as humans we know, well, that's absurd. Why would we do that? But I guess,
Old-time
but
energy.
And it
God's
was of that
mysterious.
time. It was of that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and also we have to remember the modern religions. Islam is 1,500 years old. Scientology is like 2 years old. And Buddhism is 2,500 years old. And
Are they not making that up as they go along, Sajiva? It always feels like
Christianity
it.
is 2,000 years
Well,
old, but modern humans are 150 to 200,000 years old.
Yeah.
We must have had other ideas about
Mhm.
who is God, what is God, or maybe there could have been 10,000 years where everyone was like really, really chill with the idea. No, things just came up, things happened, and here we are.
Yeah.
What is important is not the creator or a lack of a creator, but how do we, inside our tribe, treat each other so we can have a functional society?
Mhm.
Yeah. And people overall are good, but when you group them together and give them like a mob mentality, that's when you start getting your holy wars. That's when you start getting your Trumps. That's when you start getting
Tribalism
Yeah,
is a
tribalism,
big
yeah.
problem for humans. I think that probably comes from us living so many years as great apes. Tribalism is a huge problem among great apes. They're brutal. They will kill children. They will kill female apes. They will kill injured apes, old apes, right? So we've at least tempered down our tribalism to a certain degree, but I
Yeah.
think this is an ancient, deep human brain problem that
Yeah.
we feel our safety is guaranteed when we go along with the tribe, and when we when we try to destroy the other tribes who could destroy us. But
If there's one fatal flaw that God has maybe responsible for putting in humankind, or basically any inhabitants of this planet, it seems to be that might makes right. The bigger prevail somehow, which is baloney, but that's seems to be the guiding force of many countries and many people. So
yeah, but I was going to say, but humans have invented lots of ways, including modern religion, democracy, philosophy, debate, trade, also to reduce violent tribalism amongst humans. Now, even if it's possible we have not guessed at the true origin of the universe, and maybe is there a God, is there not a God, is not even a relevant question. Maybe maybe the situation is entirely something so fantastic and unimaginable. We just haven't imagined it. Regardless, we can observe that humans over time develop science, develop culture, develop laws, and right now on the planet we exist in large numbers. And aside from the places where there are wars, most humans are relatively peaceful. So
Mhm.
overall, the project of, if you call Humans on Earth the project is going pretty well. It could be far worse.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with that. I mean, we are mostly peaceful, but oh my God, are we? It's always the
We
one
haven't learned
third of the
some lessons very well.
yeah
Most lessons, maybe, but some, like that
history
whole
repeats
Nazi thing,
itself.
1945, kind of missed that one, it seems.
Yeah, I we would think.
They say never forget. We've forgotten.
God,
Yeah, when we look at Charlottesville and they're saying Jews will not replace us and they're carrying tiki torches, it's like we're regressing back to a very dark time. And I think that's why they elected Pope Leo. And
well,
uh, yeah,
religion is politics, modern politics, and back in
yeah,
the old timey days, religion was clearly, mainstream politics. So
yeah,
religion is
Sure.
politics.
yeah. Well, I think we're gonna wrap this up because we're at an hour and 21 minutes
Oh,
now.
good discussion.
So yeah, I'm just gonna do something different. I'm gonna have you guys plug your stuff so then I don't just stumble and sound like an idiot and get it wrong. So Jeff, would you like to plug your thing and then Sajid,
Sure, you can
yours?
read my movie reviews at theestablishingshot.org. You can follow me on, I'm on Blue Sky and Threads and Instagram and Facebook. Just look up the name Jeff York. You'll find me there. I also write a couple of pieces about the industry and sort of trends and such for the online magazine Pipeline Artists every month. So, and I guest on a number of podcasts, including this fine one. So, it's, if you can't find me, it's not for lack of trying.
Yeah. Yeah. Pray to God and maybe you'll find out. Or pray that
I'm
Jeff will
easier to
draw an
find.
illustration of you. Yeah. All right, Sajiwa, plug
All right.
away.
Good discussion. Sujiwa Ekanayaka, tough name. It's from Sri
Ekanayake.
Lanka, where for thousands of years, Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, and Muslims and local religious, ancient Aboriginal religions have existed relatively in peace. They did have a civil war, and they have constant flare-ups between different segments. But for a few thousand years, they have a recorded history of maybe 3,000 something, no, 2,500 years or so. So for a few thousand years, they have largely been living at peace with each other, which shows that one, it's all the same people. It's just humans from around the world with different ideas trying to have, societies where there's, diversity. So movies like this shows that it is possible for people to come to a conclusion.
Yeah.
That's helpful. So I have a movie coming out called 53 Spaceships, and I'm on YouTube. I have Cosmic Disco Detective Renee and several other movies on there. I have a blog called DIY Filmmaker on Blogger, and I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky and Facebook. So you can just type in my name and find all that stuff.
Yeah. And if you want to find me, I am at ypareviews.com. The YPA
Great
stands for
name.
You'll Probably Agree. Yeah. Actually, someone else came up with that name.
Good.
And long story short, the guy who came up with that also generated a bunch of bots on my website and I had to fire him. But that's a whole other story. But you can also find me on TikTok at YPA Reviews Chicago and on Instagram at YPA Reviews. I'm on X. I'm on Blue Sky, which is way better than X. And of course, on Facebook, You'll Probably Agree, where I review the newest movies that are coming out. I do a podcast like this every week. And I also do like little reactions to films that I see that I've been starting to do. And I notice how horribly inarticulate and stupid I am. But that's a whole other thing. All right, guys. But that's about it. Yeah. Thanks, guys. May God be with you. And good
Or
luck.
the simulation.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Matrix, baby.
May the simulation grant you all your wishes.
All right.
Thank you, Menagerie.
See you guys.